This is my real voice, by the way. If you don't believe me, you can check out my Twitch stream where I do game dev in Unreal Engine. Anyway, on with the show. Neverness to Everness. Ananta. Silver Palace.
Always true might not always stay true.
Duet Night Abyss. How big are these gacha games gonna get? This business model that started out as low-effort cash grabs are now some of the biggest, most sophisticated games. And to their credit, you get to play something resembling a AAA blockbuster without paying a cent. And the oppression level you suffer for it is actually not that bad, because the market is competitive and original titles like Wuthering Waves need to hold their own without crutching on a popular IP. Welcome to this Digital Foundry-style graphics analysis. I'll start with a general review of the game, so if you're not here for that, feel free to skip ahead. Honkai Star Rail was my first foray into gacha games, and man, what a phenomenon. They have these concerts in Shanghai where they roll out dozens of performers on stage. I visited a local anime convention and the cosplay gathering there was jam-packed. I've been a conventional gamer all my life, and it's easy to say, I'll never play one of these gacha games because the whole business model revolves around manipulation and exploitation, and yeah, not wrong, but I've come to understand they serve a certain market in places that never had a tradition of paying upfront for games. And if you don't have the whole whale psychology where you're compulsively buying tentpoles, the worst deal in video game history, or otherwise collecting characters with no moderation, I haven't found modern gacha games to be that bad. But the business model does have perverse and fascinating ramifications on the game design, story, and characters. So for me, these games are interesting objects to pick apart in more ways than just the graphics. The first time I fired up Wuthering Waves, the circular stamina bar popped up and I understood exactly what I was in for. And it does do that Breath of the Wild stuff pretty well. It entertains my cat-like sensibility to scamper up to a vantage point and survey the land. And gacha gems are a more powerful motivator for exploration than Korok seeds and brittle weapons will ever be. This addictive exploration gameplay is paired with some eye-popping cinematics. Most of them run in-engine rather than through pre-rendered FMVs. It's no accident that Unreal Engine became a go-to for film and video production in general, and this game certainly takes advantage of its toolset. The best of these cutscenes sport custom animation, visual effects, and stylish direction, just like a proper AAA blockbuster. And when a story arc reaches its crescendo, it feels like a popcorn-munching anime movie. When the cinematics do go FMV, they often delve into these hand-drawn mixed media vignettes, so Wuthering Waves easily delivers the audio-visual spectacle. Unfortunately, this is all in service of a humdrum epic story about a scourge of darkness terrorizing the science fantasy lands of Solaris 3, and you, the great hero of destiny, going from kingdom to kingdom to slay the evil monsters.
Observing the entire Solaris, and discarded data are cast into the Necrostar. It is the Necrostar itself. The abnormal frequency you encountered in the port city of Please bring it back to the modulation hall.
First impressions are pretty miserable, as the reams of dry technobabble, prattled on by one-dimensional characters, make the overarching narrative hard to follow. Thankfully, Wuthering Waves gets a dramatic overhaul something like 20 hours into the game in Fantasy, Italy. The early game's environments were plenty vertical, but this new area takes that to proper Elden Ring levels. There's a flight pack that lets me sprout wings anytime, anywhere. Zipping around this way is frankly awesome. I love to survey the lands from the sky, looking for anything interesting to swoop down upon. And the story gets a similar overhaul too. It doesn't quite take it into riveting territory, but there's a deeper and easier to follow cultural context here with characters aligned to different contentious factions that form this charismatic corner of the world. Lately, I'm finding myself more engaged in the machinations of the story.
我能拜托你和我一起抓住家族中的被试者，阻止可能的危机吗？
The main arcs follow a Bishoujo game rhythm, where you're paired up with a fantasy girlfriend for an impromptu date filled with all the staples, like death-defying anime battles, traumatic backstory theater followed by big catharsis while saving the world. It's power fantasy genre entertainment. The criticism I'll make here is that it's a little too genre. I know that main story arcs that cultivate desire for the character of the month is the almighty gacha game business model. And it's not that I think that these stories can't be entertaining. They are sometimes. But the restrictions the business model places on what the story can be, and how the ever-growing cast of characters are allowed to interact and develop throughout the larger narrative, robs Wuthering Waves of surprise, novelty, and gravitas. I would like to see it resist its own format, even just a little bit, and do something out of its ordinary. As it is, the story plays it very, very safe. I will save the rest of my review for the conclusion of this video. So without further ado, let's take a look at the graphics. It's not the splashy combat or the eye-candy characters that are the star of the show for me. It's the environments. When you gaze out to the horizon, the game looks like concept art. Irrespective of the technology driving it, this game has undeniably strong art direction at the core, pulling you towards points of interest or unexpected discoveries and lulling you into its escapist fantasy. The delights of whimsical exploration are well represented, and it wouldn't be so effective if it didn't have these glamorous vistas and eye-catching details.
交给你了。
Even the caves and one-off quest dungeons look fantastic. The graphics are so integral to the appeal of Wuthering Waves. Wuthering Waves was built on a late version of Unreal Engine 4, with backported features from Unreal Engine 5. Unreal Engine gets a lot of hate online, so let me soapbox a little about game engines. Making a game in a game engine isn't like making a mod, because making a mod is like putting toppings on a cake that's already baked. Whereas in a fresh Unreal Engine project, the technical decisions haven't yet been made. You gotta bake that cake yourself. For example, if you want shadows in your game, you have your choice of baked lighting, cascaded shadow maps, distance field shadows, and virtual shadow maps. You can use any combination of these techniques. And even within a given technique, there's tons of configurability. Lots of parameters and trade-offs to know about. Wuthering Waves in particular takes a hybrid approach to shadows, as you'll see later. The Unreal Editor has profiling tools that help you identify performance issues. I feel like a lot of devs and publishers are skipping these critical steps and shipping games with glaring problems. Some things will never change, I guess. But Unreal Engine takes most of the flack for that, even when it's demonstrably possible to ship a solid, great-looking, well-performing game with it. Kudo Games have gone deep. They have a Wuthering Waves tech talk online. It's not in my language and much of it would go over my head anyway, but from what I've gleaned, they've customized the render passes for a 30% speedup on mobile, and they've made a custom temporal anti-aliasing upscaling solution that works with their cel-shaded characters. This definitely required engine customization at a source code level. And yeah, the game performs well enough on a PC, and miraculously well on a phone, considering that it's an open-world game with a dynamic time-of-day system where every part of the world can be viewed from any angle and any distance. And getting those results takes a lot of dedication, even with an off-the-shelf game engine. So if you take anything away from this analysis, I hope it's an appreciation for how much of this stuff isn't about whether you use this game engine or that game engine, but it's the nose-to-the-grindstone efforts, ingenuity, and attention to detail that make the magic happen. One way to pick apart the graphics of Wuthering Waves is to watch the clouds go by, with the settings maxed out on a PC. And to that end, I took a series of time lapses. Each 24-hour cycle is in the ballpark of a half hour. The rendering setup is, in a word, last gen, It's an Unreal Engine 4 style deferred rendering pipeline that keeps compatibility with mobile and otherwise makes the game easy to run. Predictably, there's no light baking, which, for a world this large, would be impractical, especially for mobile. Instead, we have a directional light representing the sun or moon with cascaded shadow maps, ambient skylight, and local lighting at night that is rarely shadow casting. In these time lapses, though, I have the ray tracing effects enabled. Comparisons for those will come later. The cloud shadows rolling over the landscape are a nice touch, but if you look up, you'll find that they don't correspond to anything actually happening in the sky. The distant clouds are basically a panning texture on a sky dome, and this seems to hold true everywhere. At night, the moon follows the same arc as the sun, so the nighttime is just like daytime but with a bluer color. Which is not to say there aren't any differences. As the sun sets, this cozy shopping arcade lights up, and new crowds of people appear. This one picturesque town gets all the Nightmare Before Christmas-like after dark, with monsters replacing the pedestrians. On the other end of the spectrum, there are corners of this game world shrouded in a colored haze so thick that it's hard to tell day from night. The game isn't packed with weather effects or wind simulation, but the occasional rain shower provides a visual treat if you have ray trace reflections enabled. I'll show that off soon. The environments of Wuthering Waves are designed under a physically based rendering model, or PBR for short, and one of the facets of PBR is its materials are heavily reliant on directional lighting to give them proper definition. Ideally, there would be a global illumination solution to make sure that all surfaces in the world have directional lighting. But with the ray tracing turned off, the only directionally lit surfaces are those in view of the sun, the moon, or local light sources. Areas in shade tend to have no directional lighting information, making them look pretty flat sometimes. To address this, the game uses a screen space ambient occlusion technique called Ground Truth Ambient Occlusion, or GTAO, to provide definition to objects by darkening crevices. The more occluded a surface is, the darker it gets, within a certain radius anyway. It can't perform miracles, but it's much better than nothing. A significant issue with screen space effects in general is they can be spoiled when subjects occlude one another. At this point, you might have a sense of how lighting in the game is constructed. Ray tracing to the rescue? One of the many uses of ray tracing is to calculate bounce lighting dynamically. In the real world, light spilling onto a surface will bounce and illuminate everything around it. Ray tracing can be used to simulate this light bounce. When the sunlight spills onto this wall here, it illuminates all the stuff to the left. It's certainly more dynamic than with the effect off, where areas in shade are simply lit by a flat skylight color. Likewise, a time lapse in the shade of a tree shows the colorful dynamism of ray trace global illumination in action. Again, with the effect disabled, the life is sucked right out of the image. You might have noticed that even in the presence of ray tracing, old-school ambient occlusion is still providing definition for objects and crevices. This is because the global illumination isn't working at a surface level. I strongly suspect that Wuthering Waves is using a dynamic light probe system. Rather than tracing rays all over a surface, the light bounce is collected into a 3D volume of sparse points called light probes. And then these probes are sampled to light the surfaces nearest to them. It's one of the least intensive methods for global illumination, but the downside is you don't get high-fidelity surface detail, thus necessitating screen space ambient occlusion to fill in. In any case, I think the ray trace global illumination is pretty nice to have, because it replaces the dull ambient skylight with something dynamic. Say hello to Encore. who has been my helpful debug object throughout this investigation. Reflections are a prominent graphical feature in Wuthering Waves, even in its mobile incarnation. This is expectedly handled by Unreal Engine's screen space reflection feature, the same SSR we've been looking at throughout the PlayStation 4 generation. It's far from the worst SSR out there, but it has its usual limitations of streaky reflections and occlusion artifacts. SSR is technically a form of ray tracing, but traced against information from the screen space image buffers rather than tracing into the 3D game world. It's serviceable most of the time. Triangle ray tracing, of course, kicks it up a notch, tracing rays against an optimized 3D copy of the game world. Mirror-like surfaces in Wuthering Waves are a rare sight. But from the handful I can find, almost everything except grass and visual effects are represented in the reflected world.
该回去工作了。
Even dynamic shadows and animated characters can be seen in there. Screen space reflections are still in use, but ray tracing fills in for reflections that fall out of screen space. It usually works, but discrepancies between the two techniques can lead to artifacts in some areas. Remember when I mentioned the physically based rendering model? The theory of PBR states that all surfaces are equally reflective, but some surfaces are glossier than others. So when Wuthering Waves renders a frame, the glossier surfaces are masked by a roughness threshold and given reflections in an additional rendering pass, whether those reflections are screen space or triangle ray traced. The cutoff threshold is loosened when using triangle ray tracing, so more surfaces are given reflections, which is pretty nice. In other words, the ray tracing mode not only gives you better looking shine, but more of it. When the rain falls, the world turns into a wonderland of beautiful ray-traced reflections. The downside is a screen full of reflections has a noticeable performance impact. This also goes for the marble and brass environments of the later game. Wuthering Waves goes crazy with the reflections in the RT mode, and I love to see it. Ray trace shadows provide the least visual impact of the three features, serving as a drop-in replacement for conventional cascaded shadow maps. You get penumbra shadow softening on the primary directional light, which is nice. It also works on some of the local lighting around storefronts and such. Something curious I found with the RT mode is that foliage shadows are still handled with cascaded shadow maps. I believe this is because the animated sway of foliage isn't reflected in the ray tracing copy of the 3D world. And those discrepancies would produce artifacts, so foliage is handled with the old method. On the subject, I noticed some odd behavior with these shadow maps. It seems each cascade, which is how shadow maps are sliced along the distance, are updated at different rates rather than once per frame. You can see as I get closer to the shadow of this spinning tower, the update rate increases. And then something really bizarre happens when I hit the ground and enter combat. The update rate becomes intermittent. Shadow casting is a relatively expensive part of rendering, so I believe this is another indication of Kuro Games' deep optimization. I don't think controlling the updates of the individual shadow cascades is possible with stock Unreal Engine, so this may be a customization. These trade-offs will become starker when we examine the mobile version. All in all, the impact of ray tracing is substantial in terms of its enhancement to fidelity and its performance impact. Given how visuals are such a major part of the Wuthering Waves experience, I think it's worth turning on if your video card can handle it. I'm especially glad to see that they've included some form of RTGI, which is far above what I was expecting from a patched-in ray tracing feature in a gacha game. It adds a lot of life to the environmental lighting, even if it's the conservative, probe-based approach. It might be that its Unreal Engine 4 basis precluded anything more advanced than the ray tracing techniques of the 2010s. but they work well enough in Wuthering Waves. I've made some comparisons with the low, medium, and high settings of the ray tracing mode. For the outdoor shots, some of the differences come down to passing clouds, but from what I can glean, medium and high are pretty similar, while low shows reduced contrast and some mild light leakage in its global illumination. I figure low uses a sparser light probe grid. Likewise, the reflections in low are a tad over-smoothened. Medium quality ray tracing seems like a safe bet, providing a large performance advantage over high without much quality loss. On the opposite end of the power spectrum, let's talk about mobile. The thought of playing a fast-paced character action game with touch controls terrified me, so I decided to investigate the mobile experience in a different way. With a monstrous clip-on heatsink fan, a Bluetooth Xbox controller, and an external display, I created a docked gaming setup for my Samsung Galaxy Flip 6, and the result is kind of awesome. Even with all the graphical settings jacked up to the point where Wuthering Waves gives me a sanity check, the phone delivers a smooth enough gaming experience. I can zip around the world and get into fights, and the mild hitches here and there don't really get in the way, though they are noticeable in some cinematics. The load times are super fast. Going from the beginning of the game to a recent area takes only a few seconds. The frame rate isn't perfectly even no matter how low I set the graphics options, and the input lag isn't as solid as the PC version, but I don't know whether to attribute that to the Android operating system or this phone in particular. I don't want to assume it's the game's fault without having more devices on hand, so putting those gripes to the side, the net effect is I can almost forget that I'm not playing the PC version. This Unreal Engine-based open-world blockbuster is running at 60 frames per second on the same phone that lives in my pocket. I would say that's a technical achievement, and a testament to how overpowered flagship mobile chips are when given active cooling. The trade-offs they made, though, are evident in the extreme amount of scenery pop-in that happens during traversal. Draw calls are often a performance killer on mobile platforms, so aggressive distance culling is a go-to. Using a capture device that unfortunately limits the frame rate to 30, I've recorded several comparisons to the PC version. Interestingly enough, I did not see a single instance of missing objects while taking matching shots of various scenes. So unlike Honkai Star Rail, where I made note of missing objects in its mobile incarnation, Wuthering Waves doesn't make hard cuts to content, as far as I've noticed anyway. Instead, the cutbacks seem to take the form of lighting and material complexity of the sort that's most noticeable on foliage, reduced texture resolution and triangle density that's most noticeable in cinematics, a lack of motion blur, a weaker depth of field blur, and more conservative screen space reflections, though it's impressive that it even has them in the first place. I went on a hunt for reflections on mobile, revisiting some of the shiniest areas that I can recall. I get the feeling that Kuro games have special cased this effect to specific floors and bodies of water. Rather than the comprehensive approach to reflections that the PC version takes. Comparing the ambient occlusion between PC and mobile, the results are fairly similar, but I think the PC's GTA-O has more subtlety and range in terms of considering the Z depth. It's hard to put my finger on, but I think the darkened crevices of the mobile version look more binary, like they're either there or not based on a threshold, whereas the PC version fades the effect better. A mobile time-lapse reveals more differences with PC. The dynamic shadow draw distance is significantly curtailed, whereas the PC version has dynamic shadows stretching out to the distant scenery. However, one can see these imposter trees casting sparsely updated shadows, which is pretty interesting. Here's where the shadow optimization seen in the PC version come into starker relief. The cascaded shadow maps in the mobile version are aggressively managed. The update rate for these cascades can be horribly slow. They are also quite selective. Shadows for objects are frequently seen being added or removed from the shadow pass. However, shadows for characters are done in a separate pass, thankfully sparing them from these aggressive optimizations. As ugly as the shadows can be, this is probably a critically important reason for why the game runs so quickly on a phone. Of course, I had to check out the cinematics on mobile too. It's impressive how much of the experience remains intact, as mobile phone and real-time cinematics aren't two things that are usually spoken together. Doing matching shot comparisons with PC, the differences run the gamut. Sometimes the platforms are fairly comparable. Other times, the differences like foliage rendering and density make for stark downgrade. Wuthering Waves loves its extreme close-ups, and it's in these shots that the reduced texture resolution of the mobile port becomes clear as day. Depth of field blur is present in the mobile port, but it lacks the full creaminess and pentagonal iris shapes of the PC version, somewhat spoiling those shots that rely on rack focus. Fog also seems to be reduced. Particle effect density is curtailed too. In cutscenes, it's part of the visual storytelling craft that every shot has its own lighting setup, even moving the sun position. However, the aforementioned shadow optimizations can spoil the effect, causing the shadows to update long after the camera cut. I haven't tinkered too much with the graphics settings in mobile, but AMD's FSR makes an appearance here. I'm assuming it's FSR 2, the temporal upscaler. The result is similar to Kuro Games' temporal upscaling, though the latter has a bit of a soft look to it. Now the weird part is when I enable the new Vulkan renderer. The temporal upscaling blur is removed, making it look nearly identical to FSR. It's weird, but that's what I've seen on my phone as of writing. Your mileage may vary. And since we're here, we can enjoy the lowest preset in all of its potato-y goodness. As expected, the dynamic shadows are excised from the picture. Woe is the gamer who plays it like this. In conclusion, while PC and mobile don't look the same, the mobile version is pretty enjoyable on its own terms, at least until your phone catches on fire. It makes me wonder how the Asus ROG phone and the Red Magic Pro with a built-in cooling fan would fare with this game running flat out. With all three major configurations covered, RT on, RT off, and mobile, I decided to take some family portraits. In this city scene, the copious sunlight bouncing off of the Roman concrete walls, the brass arches, and the red carpet give the street a warm glow. The geometry of the hotel facade is strongly shaded with GTAO and RTGI. Stepping down to conventional rendering, the warm bounce lighting is replaced by the flat ambient skylight, and the hotel loses some of its contrast. And on mobile, the lighting is simplified, with some local lighting removed, the shadow draw distance greatly pulled in, and the ambient occlusion radius similarly curtailed. The story is similar in this scene, where the ruins are given a strong pink cast from the surrounding foliage. Switching off RT, the blue ambient skylight takes over in the shaded areas. And finally, on mobile, the lighting and foliage detail is reduced, alongside the fog in the distance. In this bar scene, aside from the greater coverage of orange light, there isn't much to distinguish the ray tracing. In the mobile version, the lighting is once again simplified, seemingly with a pulled-in radius for the orange light above, probably coming from this thing. I also thought that I spotted a few instances of missing objects. But upon closer inspection, it seems to be the aggressive distance culling of the mobile version in action. And finally, in this daytime landscape shot, the RT doesn't make much of a difference except over by the dam. Meanwhile, the mobile version is cut down in the usual ways on top of reduced grass density in the near field. Some of the cliffs in the background look extra potato-y, but to its credit, it still looks like Wuthering Waves. Regarding life on the PC, the game has a lot of configurability in the box. With top settings, it's a heavy game to run even on my RTX 3090. Most of the real-time footage shown in this analysis made use of DLSS performance mode at 4K. On an AMD-based handheld, the performance is pretty rough, necessitating some trade-offs. This is where omissions in the graphics settings menu become a pain point. The major omission here is render scale, necessitating I&I configuration hacks like setting SG.resolution quality to something under 100. Not a very good user experience there. Ultimately, this is one of those PC games that remind you that you're on a handheld. In my case, a 7840U based GPD Win Mini with 32GB of RAM. I'm running the game at medium-ish settings and probably 540p base resolution. And it neither runs that great nor looks that great, so I only play it this way in a pinch. Streaming it locally from my desktop at 120 frames per second is pretty sweet. Seeing smooth graphics with ray tracing and good anti-aliasing feels like cheating, because I'm channeling hundreds of watts of graphics power into my baby handheld and it all stays nice and cool. I've played a lot of Wuthering Waves this way. The other omissions pertain to proper gaming rigs. As of writing, DLSS needs to be set to version K in the NVIDIA app if you want the latest, greatest transformer model. It does a lot to clean up edges and ghost trails. Wuthering Waves also joins Honkai Star Rail in having low-quality texture filtering. For dedicated GPUs, it's usually safe to crank anisotropic filtering to the max in the driver. Though really, it should be added to the graphics menu. As a game to simply play, Wuthering Waves has its upsides and downsides, but I think it's fun overall. The combat is a bit too hyper for me to want to get deep into, but it feels good to push the buttons. The silver lining of the lame story is I'm not very tempted to collect the characters, leaving me to explore the world and enjoy the spectacle of a cinematic, open-world blockbuster without feeling too obligated to engage in its business model. It's a game I played furiously for a couple of weeks, put on the shelf, and then came back to a few months later to blast through the latest stuff. The glamour and pizzazz of the new areas continue to impress, and I think this will be a nice title to catch up on every now and then. Graphically, I think it's a competent exploration action game on big boy gaming rigs, with visuals that are frequently sublime. The mobile version, though, is a legitimate marvel. The sheer audacity of a game like this running at full speed on a phone. It's not that any of its rendering is cutting edge, but all of its craftsmanship, customizations, and calculated trade-offs result in what feels like an impossible game. I wanted to get this analysis out the door while it's still the most graphically advanced gacha game on the market, because it really seems like the avalanche is coming, and then we'll see if Wuthering Waves can hold on to the crown. As of now, it reigns supreme as the king of spectacle on high-end rigs, and pushes the envelope in its own ways on mobile too. No matter how big and high-tech they get, these blockbuster gacha games have to scale down to the humble smartphone in the end. And for that reason, they'll always fascinate me, at least on a technical level. Thanks for watching this analysis.